Hi, and welcome back to part 2 here of this project that we're working on with C# and ASP.NET. We're making a website here that is showing a whole bunch of products. And in this video, we're going to extend a project that we've already started. So here's the new features. As you can see, we have a list of products here, and I have two menu options. I can search for a product, and I can display all products. So let's say I search for what I already did earlier called wine, and I will see all of the products that have the word wine in the name. And so you can see I have a lot of data. So we're going to be using a website called Mockaroo to generate this fake data. We're going to put it into a database, and then we're going to add this search feature. So that's right ahead. So here is the Visual Studio code that we were working on, and just to review some of the things that you should have done. So if you haven't done these things, go back and watch the previous video. We have a controller called Product Controller. And you can see that there is an index page and a message page and a welcome page. We're ignoring the message and welcome. That was from something that isn't really relevant. But in the index section, we're using this area called the hard-coded data repository class. And so we created that in the services folder. So this here is the fake data that we're working with. We're going to delete this part and replace it with a database. So over on the left side, you can see that I have the database browser open. So if you want to get to that, you go to the View menu and you choose SQL Server Object Explorer. So if I select that, it will bring up this menu here. Now I'm going to go into the databases and see what's already there. So you can see we have a test database, and I had created a users table in a previous tutorial. So we're not going to use that right now, but we're going to put a new table in there. So the first thing I want to do is right-click where it says Tables and add a new table. So for this table design, I'm going to add some new rows to it. I guess these are columns. So the first one, the ID, we'll just leave it alone. It's an integer. The second one we'll call Name, and let's give it a name characters of 50 letters. For price, I'm going to choose decimal, and you notice the rounding off part here is the number after the second number after the comma. So I'm going to have two decimal places. And then the last item we're going to create is a description. And a description is text, so we'll make that an nchar. And I'm going to give it some 500 characters of possible letters that we can use. A couple of things I'm going to tweak down at the bottom. So instead of just calling this table, I'm going to call this thing products. The other thing I want to change is the ID number. I want to make this an auto increment, so I go down to the properties and I am selecting identity specification, and I'm changing is identity to true. And you should see the default numbers for identity increment is 1, and the identity seed is also 1. So both of these will begin at 1, and then the increment will be by 1. Okay, so that's all of the items that I want to define here. So let's go ahead and choose the Update button, and this will go to the table and update the database inside of the test database. So you can see over on the right or on the left here, we have a products table. If I do a right click and choose View All Data, then I should be able to see that the table is empty. The next thing I want to do is go get some new data and fill this table. Now I could go through and type it manually, but this is much easier. We're going to use a website called Mockaroo, and you can see that it generates data for us. And so if I look at the default that I draw up on the page and choose Preview, I would be able to see that this would generate a whole bunch of names. So we're going to do something similar to that, except we're going to do it with products. All right, so let's start generating our products now. So for the first item in the list, instead of a human name, I'm going to change this to a product. So I'm going to search through the list until I come to product, and it looks like grocery. It'd be a good idea. So groceries is going to be my new product. And for the next item in the list, I'm going to choose price as the name, and price is going to be a number. And we can choose this as a number that is from 1 to 100, and we'll give it 2 decimal points for our precision. So that works good for currency. Then the last item we'll create is called description. And for description, I could use something like a slogan, or I see another one called sentences. And so I will use a sentence that is from 1 to 10 words in length. And then you can see that if I'm done here, I can change the table name to dbo.products and then select the format from the choices and choose SQL as the format. And then I click preview and I can see that I have a whole bunch of SQL statements. I'm going to close that. I'm going to go back and change a couple of things here. So first name, I'm just going to change to the word name because I don't have a first name in my database. And then for ID number, actually, since I have auto increment, I probably can skip this part, so I'm just going to delete the ID number. So I have 3 rows that I'm going to insert, even though I have 4 columns in my table. So let's leave all these choices here and choose preview again. And I switch to the SQL view, and there I have it. So I want to generate this as a text file, so let's go ahead and download the data, and it will put it into my downloads folder. So I'm going to go browse and find that downloads folder. So I'm searching on my computer here and looking for downloads, and there is my new guy that I just created. So I'm going to open that up with something. What do I have? Open. Do I have, looks like Notepad. So you can see that it is going to insert into the table here these 3 columns. So I'm just going to select all and copy. So now that I have all these copied, I'm going to go into the database and right-click on the test database and choose a new query. So for the new query, I can just paste in all of these lines here, click the little green triangle, and you can see that I have a whole bunch of green results, and it says 1 row affected. So let's go and try and look at the data again. So I'm going to right-click and choose View Data, and this time, does it work? It doesn't work. Let's do a refresh, and there it is. Now I can see that I have all of these new products in my database. So that's just a shortcut way to make generated data. Notice the ID number is automatically supplied for us, so I didn't have to go through and add that manually with the Mockaroo data. I let the database do that for me. All right, so now it's time to put this stuff to work. So I can close off some of these tabs, and then I can go back into my code. So close all these dudes and don't have to save it. Okay, so now I'm going back into my services area. And you can see that I have a hard-coded sample database repository. I'm going to make a new version of this and use the database instead of these hard-coded values. So now I'm going to right-click in the services folder and create a new item. So we're going to create this class, and we're going to call it products DAO. So DAO stands for Data Access Object. And it's a class. I'm going to implement an interface, but it is a class. So now I have this simple looking class. I put a colon after the class name, and that means I'm going to implement something. So I'm going to implement the iProducts service, which is an interface that has several items. So we are going to have to fix this error that shows up. We got red underlined, which tells us that there's something missing. And I'm going to select the option that says Implement Methods. And all of the methods that are in the interface should now have some code on the screen that says these are all of the things that you eventually are going to have to create. So the first item that we're going to work on is this section here called Get All Products. So I'm going to delete the current code that's in there, and then we're going to have to do some extra SQL work to get to our database. Now the first thing that I need to do is connect to the database, and using a connection string is probably the easiest way here. So I'm going to select the test database, go to its properties, find the connection string, and copy it. Coming back into my product DAO file, I'm going to create a string value called connection string. And that connection string is going to be a paste of our current thing that I just copied. Notice I'm going to put an @ symbol in front of the string, so that way it treats all slashes as literals. I don't have to go and escape things. I don't have to put double backslashes anywhere. And so now I have a connection string that will allow us to talk to our database. So now in the method called getAllProducts, we're going to create a list of products. So a list of type product model. And I'm going to call it found products. So whatever it could find. And it's going to start off as an empty list. And then we're going to go to the database and fill that list. So the SQL statement to get all products is the simplest statement that we'll find here. So it is simply select star from the table, which is dbo.products. So now I'm going to begin a section where we're going to be using a connection. So I'm going to start with using, and then I'm going to generate a connection. So SQL connection is the type of object that I'm going to create. I'm going to name it connection, and then I am going to provide it with the connection string. So this is standard ways to open up a connection to your SQL database. Then I'm going to have to import something. I'm going to actually install a package so that I can talk to the database. So it's the SQL client. And then after it's installed, I'm going to take out this last semicolon. And so we have now a section where we can talk to the database inside of these curly brackets. The first thing I do now is create a command. So the object is called SQL command, and I'm going to name it command. It's a new SQL command object that requires two parameters. One is the SQL statement, and the other is the connection. So the next area, I'm going to have to use a try-catch because you're never guaranteed success when you're writing SQL statements. So in the try-catch area, I'm going to do the catch area first. So catching means I'm going to handle an error. So I will simply print out a console message, and I need an exception value. So that will automatically be passed in as something called EX. So EX.message is what I want to print. Next, I want to get all of the data that comes from the reader. And so we're going to create a new item and add it to the products found list. So productsfound.add, and then inside of there, we're going to create a new object. So for each of the properties, such as ID, we're going to get it from the reader. So reader position 0. Reader position 1 goes with the name. Price is in the second position, or I guess that's position number 3. And then the description is last, which is reader square brackets 3. Now you notice that we have some issues here. It says you cannot actually do this. It says you have an object and you may not get an integer back like you expect. So the database may have a string, it may have a decimal, but we're going to guarantee that it is an integer by providing a cast statement. So for each of these items down the line, I'm going to let the compiler or the code editor here do the casting for me. So it knows that name is a string. It knows that price is a decimal, and it knows that description is also a string. So if our database is correct, all of these items will be imported properly and the cast will work. If any of these would fail, then it will go to the catch statement and we would get a message that says incompatible data types, such as putting a string in where a decimal should go, or vice versa. So we're almost done here. The last thing you notice here, it says at the top, we have some error. It says not all code paths return a value. Well, we have a value that we want to return. It's called found products. And so that'll be the last statement that we do. So at the end, I will put in return found products and all errors go away. So this method hopefully will work. We'll have to test it, of course, but I'm going to save it and now go back to the controller to add this new functionality. So I'm switching back into the controllers folder and I am looking at the product controller. So before I used the hard-coded repository, I'm going to delete that and replace it with something else. So that something else that I'm going to replace it with is the products DAO. So we're going to instantiate a new copy of this, and I'm going to take one of the selections. I selected products. So products is a new version of the product DAO. And then I want to return to the view all of the products. So I can just replace the original and put in the word products here. So products.getAllProducts is the statement that should get them all. Now, if I did this right, everything will run and we will see all the new products in our list. Okay, so I've got the application up and running. So up in the URL bar, let's put in here /product. And this should bring up a new list of products that came from the database instead of the hard-coded values that we had before. And so you can see that the list here starts with beans that are dry navy beans. And if I scroll through, I probably have like 1,000 different items here. It was a big bunch of data that I got from Mockaroo. And so it looks to me like the first stage here is set. So the next part here we're going to do is add a search function. So if I'm going to add a search function, I need to go into the products DAO to do the coding there. So since these two functions are going to be very similar to each other, I'm going to copy the code that came from getAllProducts. So I'm going to press Control-C. I'm going to find the next method called search. And so here is search products. And since they are similar, I'm going to start with the code here and modify it. So instead of searching all products, I'm going to add a qualifier. So the changes that I'm going to have to make in this code start with the SQL statement. So let's go look into select from products, where, and I'm going to add name equals, and I'm going to put an at name. So this is called a prepared statement, where at name stands for some other item. So we have to go and supply that down lower. So it looks like about line 66 is where I'm going to put it. So to put the parameter in, I put in command dot add parameters, or it's called parameters. And then I choose add with value. And then I have to tell it which parameter is being added here. So this is at name. And then the item behind it is what I want to replace it with. So I want to match all products that match the search term. So I will put search term in there. And then before and after the search term, I want to add a wildcard character. So that means I can provide extra characters before the search term and after the search term, and it will still match. So I can do a partial search on the product name. Now, all of the rest of the items should remain the same. I'm still going to have a products found list and return that. So how do I use search products? I've got it created in my DAO. I need to go back to the controller to add that. So let's switch back into the product controller, and I'm going to add a new method. So the first thing I want to do is name the method and provide it with a parameter. So let's call this new method search results. And I'm expecting that this method is going to accept a string, and the string we'll call search term. So it will provide a way to look for something in our database. And then I'm going to have to return a view. Now this isn't going to work quite right yet. We've still got a few more modifications, but we want to make sure that we got the main idea is that search results is our method name, and it requires one parameter. So I'm going to do things similar to what we did in the index method. So first of all, I need to have access to the database. So I'm going to create a new instance of the products DAO, call it product, and then we're going to create a list. So a list that I'm going to call product list. It's going to be a list of type product model. We're going to fill that list with products.search products. So search products is the method in the DAO, and it needs to have one input term. So that is search term. So providing that string will provide me with a partial list. Now I'm going to redisplay this, but not on the usual method. So in the view, I'm going to put the word index in there. So I'm going to show the index view, which is the exact same view as provided by the index method. However, in this case, I'm going to provide it from a different method. So we need to provide it also a list of data, so we will call it products list. So compare the two methods, the index method and the search results method. They're very similar. They're duplicating some work here. So let's test this out and see if it runs. All right, so we're going to run the application. I'm going to put in the slash and then the word product. And hopefully we get the exact same results we did before. We should see all products display on our list. Okay, so this seems to work. This index method is what is being called. Now, if I want to call the second method, which is search results, then I would put in a slash and then the word search results or search. So search results is what I'm looking for. So in this case, the results came back exactly the same. So that means that everything that I put in my search query matched the original. So I wasn't very specific. So what I want to do next is put in a query. So after the search results, I'm going to put a question mark and then the variable name that I'm using called search term. And let's provide it with something like wine and see if any wine comes up. And so the results now change. You can see that ID number 6 in my case was wine, number 32, and so on. So experiment. Instead of wine, put something else like a flower. And so now the results show a different search term each time I run the app. So this here is partway there. So it would be nice to provide a search form so that we can display a data entry item so we can search for wine or flower or any other key term. So I want to create a new method in my controller called search form, and its job will be to display the search form. So I'm going to just return the view of the same name. So let's create that view. Let's go ahead and right-click inside of this method I just made and choose Add View. I'm going to select Razor View and choose Add. Now for the model in the template, I'm going to choose Create for my template. And then for the model, I'm going to search with product, where is product? Product model. And choose Add. So the new form is created. And I'm going to make some major modifications to make this work the way I want it to. But for right now, you can see that it is a data entry form that corresponds to a product model. So it has an ID, name, price, and description entry field. All we really need is one entry field to add a search term. Okay, so let's start our modifications. So let's start in the center here where I have all the data entry forms. I really only need one item to search for, and that's the search term. So I'm going to delete most of this. I'm going to keep one of them though and use it as my starting point. So the label, we'll call it search for a product name. So that'll be the label of the data entry form. And then the next item we'll create as an input, and the type name has to be important here. So name equals search term. So that actual matches the variable in the controller. So search term with a capital T. And then the classes are about bootstrap formatting. So if you don't get these right, they won't look right, but they'll still work. So class equals form-control. And then for the input, let's change the name of the button from submit, and we'll put the value in as search, so it'll display as a search item on the display on the web browser. And then up at the top, let's call this form title search form, and we will not need a model. So there is no data validation going on here. We're just accepting a string and then sending that off to the next action. So double check your work here, make sure that everything matches up with what I've got here. And so search form should now display something. Okay, it looks like we're up and running with the app. I'm going to put in a new URL, so I'm looking for product to start with. Now I'm going to put in the word search form for the next part, and there it is. That's the new form that we see on the screen. So compare the code on the left side to what you got on the right side, and you should see how this works. Now, just like we did before, I'm going to put in a search term such as wine and choose search, and it's supposed to go and generate a partial list of all the items in the database and display them on the screen. So it looks like it did its job. It went to search results and then provided the partial view. Now what's the difference here? How come before when I put up at the URL I put a question mark, the search term equals wine, and this time I just used a form? So this is the difference between a post request and a get request. What you see right here is a post request where it comes from a form and the URL does not contain any special text. They both work here, so get and post are both responding to my requests. Now it would be nice to add these two items in the nav bar, so we have a search form and then we have all results. So let's go check that next. Okay, to find my nav bar, I'm going into the views folder and I'm looking in shared, and I think it's in layout. So let's see what's inside of layout. So opening up layout, sure enough, I see the section called navbar. So in these areas where there is an LI item, we have a link that will create an action. So there's privacy and index. So rather than having to retype this, I'm just going to copy privacy and paste it, and then paste it again. So now I have two more links. So the action that I'm looking for is probably for all products. So let's go with all products. And I'm just going to give the text for that as the word products. So for the next item, the action will be called search form. And I'm not sure, do I want to have a long sentence or short? I'm just going to leave it as short for the text and call it search. So I'm going to double check a few things. So search form is one action. All products is the other action. I better double check to make sure I'm right. So I'm going to the product controller to check to see if those are the actual things that I used. So the items that I'm looking for, one is called index and the other one is called search form. So index is the actual one that I need. So let's go back into the layout and see if there's something I missed. There is something I missed. So the word index goes here for the action. But what is different about this index compared to the index up above? Are they different? They are different. They should be different. The controller name should be different. So I copied and pasted an action for the home controller, and I forgot to change that. So what's my controller here? That is the product controller. So I'm going to put in product. Let's see if I can spell. So I'll put in product for both of these instead of home. Let's see if this works. So it looks like the app is running, and you can see that on my nav bar I have two new items. Let's click them and see if they work. So I click on products, and it should take me to the index of the product controller, which I believe shows all the products. And there they are. So let's go to the search item now, and this is supposed to display the search form. And if I put in something such as beer and see what comes up, I'm going to get a partial list of all of the items in my database. And so I've added something to the nav bar. Now in the next video, we're going to change this table into a grid. And so we're going to get into Bootstrap and CSS and create a Flexbox grid that will be much more appealing, and it will show pictures as well. So that's ahead with pictures, a Flexbox grid, and a little bit more modification to our program before we move on. So we'll see you soon.